Hello everyone, this is Kenneth, and in this video we shall be looking at one of the most important topics in microeconomics, the theory of demand. A theory that seeks to explain how consumers behave when confronted with increases or decreases in the prices of goods and services that they consume. You may have at some point in time or the other heard about the saying that market is a good way to organize economic activities, or that government should not intervene in the economy, or that prices and quantity should be left to be determined by market forces. The pertinent question to ask is, what are these market forces? And the answer is demand and supply. When we talk about market forces in economics, we are referring to the forces of demand and supply. As in this video, we are going to be focusing only on the demand component of the two market forces. Hence, we are going to be focusing on the theory of demand, while the theory of supply is going to be covered in our subsequent series. So, under the theory of demand, we shall be looking at the meaning and definition of demand, distinction between needs, wants and demand schedule, individual and market demand schedule, other than we look at demand curve, which contains individual and market demand curve too. We'll explain the law of demand and the reasons for the inverse relationship between quantity demand and price. Under the reason for the inverse relationship, we're going to be looking at the income effects, the substitution effects, and the diminishing marginal utility. In economics, demand is a concept used to describe consumers' willingness to part with their money or to part with purchasing power in exchange for some specified goods and services. Every meaningful discussion on demand usually begins with a distinction between needs, wants, and demand. Needs, wants, and demand. Needs in economics refers to basic requirements or basic necessities which are crucial for survival, such as food, shelter, clothes, and so on and so forth. While wants refers to those human desires which are not as essential for survival as needs, but are expressed by humans, such as the desire for high quality or high tech phones, a desire for having a mansion, desire to own a private jet, and so on and so forth. While demand, on the other hand, constitutes either need or want that is backed up by the ability to pay. Hence, demand arises only when an individual, aside expressing his willingness and desire to own a particular commodity, is equally able to back up that desire in terms of having the financial ability to purchase that commodity, and equally express the readiness to purchase any quantity of such commodity at the current or the prevailing market price. For example, in contemporary society, you need a smartphone for basic communication and other work-related tasks, but you want a high-end smartphone with better features, more advanced features in terms of battery capacity, camera quality, and so on and so forth. While demand only arises when, aside expressing desire or willingness to own a smartphone, one is ready to purchase at least a model of a smartphone such as a Tecno or a Samsung or an iPhone at the prevailing market price. By definition, demand can be defined as the quantity of goods and services that a particular individual or group of individuals are willing to purchase at various prices within a defined period of time. Imagine a petrol consumer, for instance. His demand for petrol refers to the quantities in terms of liters of petrol that he is willing and able to purchase at various prices. And this is being referred to as individual demand. Let's equally imagine all consumers of a petrol within a locality. Their demand for petrol refers to the quantities of petrol measured in liters that all consumers of petrol are willing and able to purchase at various prices within the same period of time. Hence, we have individual demand and we have market demand. Individual demand refers to the quantities of a particular commodity that a particular consumer of that commodity is willing and able to purchase at various prices. While market demand refers to the quantities of goods and services that all consumers of that commodity are willing and able to purchase at various prices within the same time period. Let us illustrate the concept of demand using the aid of a table. What is being regarded to as demand schedule. Like I said, demand schedule can be defined as the tabular representation of the various goods and services that consumers are willing to buy at various prices within a defined period of time. In simple form, demand schedule is the tabular representation of consumers' demand. Just like we have individual demand and market demand, the same way we have individual demand schedule and market demand schedule. While individual demand schedule deals or refers to the tabular representation of the various quantities of a particular commodity that an individual consumer of that commodity is willing and able to purchase at various prices. Market demand schedule refers to the tabular representation of the various quantities of goods and services that all consumers of a particular commodity are willing and able to purchase at various prices. Let us begin with a hypothetical scenario of an individual petrol consumer. Let's refer to this consumer as Mr. A. Mr. A. Before Mr. A leaves his house to the petrol station, he has a price in mind that he expects a liter of fuel to be sold, probably based on his recent purchase. Based on the estimate he had on the projected price of petrol he had, the consumer of petrol, Mr. A, already had an estimated quantity of fuel in terms of liter that he was prepared to buy when he gets to the petrol station. However, he might get to the petrol station, like I said, and discover that the price of petrol per liter have increased. And in that case, the consumer, Mr. A, will no longer be willing and able to buy the same quantity he had projected from house. So when he gets and discovers that the price of petrol have increased, he is likely going to decrease the quantity of petrol he's going to buy at the new price. It is equally a possibility that Mr. A would get to the petrol station only to find out that the price of petrol has decreased from what he purchased the last time to a lower price. And in that case, Mr. A would be willing and able to purchase a greater quantity of petrol over and above what he had projected earlier. Let's assume, for instance, that Mr. A had projected that the price of a liter of petrol was 150 naira. And based on that estimate, he was prepared to buy, let's say, 40 liters of petrol. So in this case, price is measured in naira, while quantity is measured in liters. If Mr. A gets to the petrol station and found that the price of petrol has increased from 150 naira per liter to 200 naira per liter, he would decrease the quantity he had expected to purchase. Let's say he discovered that the price of petrol is now 200 naira. He will no longer buy 40 liters of fuel, but he will now buy 20 liters of petrol. It is equally a possibility, like I said, that he could get to the petrol station and the price of petrol has fallen from what he had projected. And let's assume that he got to the petrol station and the price of fuel has fallen to, say, 100 naira per liter. Mr. A would be willing to buy a greater quantity of petrol than he had previously projected. And let's assume that Mr. A, at the price of 100 naira, would be willing to purchase, say, 60 liters of petrol. Hence, we can see that we have a series of price quantity pairs, which defines the way that Mr. A is going to behave when he gets to the petrol station. So this series of price quantity pairs represents the individual demand schedule of Mr. A. So we can refer to this as Mr. A's individual demand schedule. Let's equally assume for simplicity's sake that there are only two consumers of petrol within the locality we are analyzing. We know in real world that there are usually thousands or millions of consumers of petrol or other commodities. But for the sake of simplicity, we shall be assuming that only two individuals are consuming petrol in this particular locality, because from their behavior we could adjudge the behavior of the entire participants in the petrol market. Yes, let's assume that there is another consumer of petrol. Let's say Mr. B. In this case, we have Mr. A. Let's say we have another petrol consumer known as Mr. B. And just the same way Mr. A did, Mr. B had a projected price and quantity he was going to buy when he gets to the market. Like I said, probably based on his previous consumption. Let's assume that Mr. B equally projected that the price of petrol was it's going to be 150 naira per litre when he gets to the petrol station. And at this price, he was willing to purchase, say, 60 litres of petrol. Remember that Mr. A, at the price of 50 naira per litre, Mr. A was willing to purchase only 40 litres, but Mr. B was willing to purchase 60 litres of petrol at the price of 150 naira. If Mr. B gets to the petrol station and discover that the price has increased to 200 naira, he will not be willing to and able to purchase up to 60 litres again. He will decrease it to, say, 40 litres of petrol. But if he discover that the price of petrol had gone down from 150 to 100, Mr. B would be willing to purchase a greater quantity of petrol over and above what he had projected. Let's assume he was willing and able to purchase 80 litres of petrol. We can look at the price quantity pairs that define or characterize the behavior of Mr. B in the petrol market. Hence, we can refer to this as Mr. B's individual demand schedule. Individual demand schedule, which shows us the various prices and quantity relationship that characterizes the behavior of Mr. B. Hence, it shows us the various quantities of petrol that Mr. B is willing and able to purchase at various prices of liters of petrol. The two represent the two individuals that are operating in the petrol market, and with the information we have gotten, we can then go into the market demand schedule. A market demand schedule, like I said earlier, is a tabular representation of the various quantities of goods and services that all consumers of a particular commodity are willing and able to purchase at various prices. Hence, when we are looking at the market demand schedule, we are looking at the quantities that both Mr. A and Mr. B, and of course the other participants that we did not include in this analysis, the quantities of petrol that they are going to purchase when the price is either 100 naira per litre or 150 naira per litre or 200 naira per litre. Hence, we have market demand, schedule. Here we're going to have price, and here we're going to have quantity. But in this case, it's going to be quantity of consumption by Mr. A plus quantity of consumption by Mr. B. Hence, when the price was 100 naira per litre, Mr. A was willing to purchase 60 litres of petrol, while Mr. B was willing to purchase 80 litres of petrol. Hence, two of the consumers were willing to purchase 140 litres of petrol. But when the price of petrol is 150 naira per litre, Mr. A was willing to purchase 40 litres of petrol, while Mr. B was willing to purchase 60 litres of petrol. Hence, the two consumers were willing to purchase 100 litres of petrol altogether. And when the price increased further from 150 to 200 naira per litre, Mr. A was willing to purchase only 20 litres of petrol, while Mr. B was willing and able to purchase 40 litres of petrol. So the entire consumer were willing and able to purchase 60 litres of petrol. Hence, we can refer to the above as the market demand schedule. Having derived both the individual and market demand schedules in respect of Mr. A and Mr. B, who constitute the entire consumers of petrol in this economy we are considering, we can now proceed to draw the demand curve, which is a graphical representation of the demand schedule. Simply put, demand curve is a graphical representation of the various quantities of goods and services that consumers of a particular commodity are willing and able to purchase at various prices within a defined period of time. By careful observation, we can see that as price of a litre of petrol increased from 100 to 150 naira per litre, and then from 150 to 200 naira per litre, the quantity in terms of litre demanded by Mr. A was decreasing. It decreased from 60 to 40 and from 40 to 20. And the same thing applies when Mr. B decreased his consumption from 80 to 60 and from 60 to 40 as a result of increase in price from 100 to 150 and from 150 to 200. And the same scenario is equally applicable in the market demand schedule, whereby the two consumers of petrol decrease their total quantity demanded from 150 litres of petrol to 100 litres of petrol, then to 60 litres of petrol, as price increased from 100 naira per litre to 150 naira per litre and to 200 naira per litre. Hence, we can see that the behavior of Mr. A is exactly replicated by Mr. B and is equally replicated by the entire market. Hence, for us to draw the demand curve, we are going to use only the information about Mr. A to show us how the demand curve of Mr. A or an individual consumer of petrol in this economy can look like. Then we can then equally plot the demand curve in respect of the market demand schedule. From the demand schedule that we had earlier, when the price of a litre of petrol was 100 naira, Mr. A was willing and able to purchase 60 litres of petrol. Let's see that 60 here. The scale might not exactly be represent what we want, but it will give us a very close approximation. But when the price increased from 100 per litre to 150 naira per litre, Mr. A was willing and able to purchase only 40 litres of petrol. So when it was 150 naira per litre, Mr. A was only willing and able to purchase 40 litres of petrol. When the price increased further to 200 naira per litre, Mr. A was only able to purchase 20 litres of petrol. So from 200, I was only willing to purchase 20 litres of petrol. Sorry, not 200. Hence, if we join the 3 points like this, we obtain what is known as the demand curve. And this demand curve shows the various quantities of petrol that Mr. A is willing and able to purchase at various prices. Hence, you could see that when the price of petrol per litre is 200, Mr. A was willing and able to purchase only 20 litres of petrol. But when the price of petrol decreased to 150 naira, Mr. A was willing and able to purchase 40 litres of petrol. However, when it fell further to 100 naira per litre, Mr. A was willing and able to purchase 60 litres of petrol. And hence, in between, we can find other price quantity combinations that Mr. A was willing and able to purchase. Let's do the same in the case of the market demand curve. Hence, we refer to this as Mr. A's demand curve, which, like I said earlier, is a graphical representation of the various quantities of goods and services that a particular consumer is willing and able to purchase at various prices. Now we are going to the market demand curve. A market demand curve, like I said earlier, is the graphical representation of the various quantities of goods and services that all consumers of a particular commodity are willing and able to purchase at various prices. And in this instance, we have only two consumers of petrol. And these two consumers of petrol, when the price of petrol was 100 naira per litre, the two consumers were willing and able to purchase up to 140 litres of petrol. But when the price increased from 100 naira per litre to 150 naira per litre, the two consumers were willing and able to purchase only 100 units of the same commodity. 100 units of the same commodity. When price rose further from 150 to 200 naira per litre, the two consumers were only willing and able to purchase 60 litres of petrol. Hence, if we join the 3 points together, we equally obtain a curve which slopes downward from left to right, which is regarded as the demand curve. And in this case, this demand curve is the market demand curve, and it shows us the various quantities of petrol that all consumers of petrol are willing and able to purchase at various prices. Hence, when the price of petrol is 200 naira per litre, all the consumers were willing and able to purchase only 60 litres of petrol. But when the price fall from 200 naira to 150 naira per litre, all consumers of petrol were willing and able to purchase 100 litres of petrol. And when the price fall further from 150 naira per litre to 100 naira per litre, all consumers of petrol were willing and able to purchase 140 litres of petrol. Hence, we can see that what is true of the individual consumer is equally true of the entire market participants. After all, the market demand schedule, like we had earlier, is nothing other than a horizontal summation of the various quantities that are demanded by all the consumers of petrol in this market. Hence, we can see that the demand curve, both individual demand curve and the market demand curve, represent a curve that slopes downward from left to right, signaling that as prices of a particular commodity, or signaling that as prices of petrol decreases from 200 naira to 150, then to 100 naira, quantity demanded of petrol in terms of litre increased from 20 to 40 to 60. And the same thing is equally applicable in the case of the market demand curve, whereby as prices of petrol per litre decrease from 200 naira to 150 to 100 naira per litre, quantity demanded by all the market participants increased from 60 litres of petrol to 100 litres of petrol and then to 140 litres of petrol. Hence, the demand curve establishes a negative relationship or an inverse relationship between price and quantity. This represents the price and this represents the quality in this two-dimensional graph. The same thing applicable here. This is the price and this represents the quantity. Like I said, the demand curve shows an inverse relationship between the price and quantity of commodity. And this inverse relationship leads us into what is known as the law of demand. The law of demand states that holding other factors constant or other things remaining the same, or ceteris paribus, the higher the price of a commodity, the lower the quantity of that commodity demanded. Therefore, the law of demand establishes an inverse relationship between quantity, demand, and price. Hence, price and quantity do not move in the same direction. Price and quantity in economics tend to move in opposite direction, meaning that as price is moving in one direction, quantity demand is moving in the other direction, of course, opposite direction. Hence, if the price of a commodity is increasing, the quantity of that commodity that will be demanded by consumers will keep decreasing. And if the price of commodity is decreasing, the quantity demanded of that commodity is going to be increasing. What are the reasons behind the inverse relationship between quantity demanded and the price of a commodity? Economists have identified three basic reasons to account for this nature of relationship. And these reasons are the income effect, the substitution effect, and the diminishing marginal utility. We have the income effect, the substitution effect, and the diminishing marginal utility. The income effect shows or explains what happens to quantity demand as money loses its purchasing power as a result of an increase in price of a commodity. And it equally shows what happens to quantity demand as money gains purchasing power as a result of a decrease in the price of a commodity. Hence, as prices of a commodity changes from one value to the other, money loses its purchasing power or gains a purchasing power, depending on whether the price increases or decreases. Let's take for instance the scenario we painted earlier of petrol consumers, the two petrol consumers, Mr. A and Mr. B. And let's assume that Mr. A and Mr. B had a total of say 20,000 naira, 20,000 naira, which they had budgeted for the consumption of petrol. If the price of a petrol is 100 naira per litre, it means that 20,000 naira which is the total income of the two consumers in the market, could buy as much as 20,000 naira divided by 100 naira per litre. Hence, 20,000 naira can purchase up to 200 litres of petrol. However, if the price of a litre of petrol increase from 100 naira to 200 naira, you can see that the same units of money or a given amount of money, say this 20,000 naira, can no longer purchase up to 200 litres of petrol, because now the price of a litre of petrol has increased. Hence, 20,000 naira can now purchase, say, 20,000 divided by 200 per litre, which will give us 100 litres. Hence, as a result of increase in price from 100 naira per litre to 200 naira per litre, a given amount of money, in this instance 20,000 naira, has lost its purchasing power. And due to the loss in this purchasing power, a given amount of money can no longer purchase the same quantity of petrol e used to purchase previously. Hence, in economics, we refer to this as a loss in real income, which is a reduction in the quantity of goods and services that a given amount of money can purchase. Hence, as prices of a commodity increases, consumers are incapacitated because the given amount of money which they have budgeted for the consumption of that particular commodity will no longer purchase up to the amount of commodity they had projected. So they will have to make do with the fact that currently, based on the prevailing market price, the amount of money they have can only purchase a lower quantity of that commodity, and this is what is referred to as the income effect. Hence, the income effect can summarily be defined as the portion of change in quantity demand that occurs as a result of the fall or rise in the real income of the consumers as a result of either a rise in price or a fall in price. Let's go to the second one, which is the substitution effect. The substitution effect is used to explain what happens to quantity demand as consumers of a commodity switches from consumption of one commodity to the consumption of another commodity. In economics, it is believed that virtually every commodity has a close substitute which can be consumed in its place. Hence, it is right or it is easy for us to identify two separate commodities that can be consumed in place of the other. For instance, we can think about commodities that are more or less substitutes, such as we have Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, popularly referred to as Coke. We have Bonvita and Milo. We have you can have instances that are not too close but serve the same purpose or serve similar purpose, such as the use of gas cylinder, such as the use of gas cylinder and the use of local firewood to cook firewood. In these three instances I have just given, an individual consumer of Pepsi, if he decides not to consume Pepsi, he can switch his resources from Pepsi consumption to Coca-Cola consumption. An individual consumer of Bonvita, if he decides he's no longer comfortable with consuming Bonvita, he could switch the resources with which he used to purchase Bonvita into purchasing Milo. And the same thing happens to an individual consumer of gas who uses such gas to power his gas cylinder, with which provides energy for him to cook his food. He or she could decide that he's no longer comfortable with price of gas or whatever, and then switch his consumption. Instead of using gas cylinder, he will switch into using local firewood. So what happens to substitute case like this when prices of commodity increases or decreases? If the price of a commodity increases and the price of the substitute good remain the same, the consumer of that commodity will now perceive that commodity as being relatively more expensive compared to the substitute good, and hence the consumer will switch resources from consuming that commodity into consuming the substitute commodity. Let's take for instance Let's take consumer of Coke and Pepsi for instance. If the price of Coke increases, while the price of Pepsi remains constant, remains the same, does not change, the consumer is going to perceive Coke as being relatively more expensive compared to Pepsi. Hence, the demand for Coke is going to reduce. Demand for Coke is going to decrease, and demand for Pepsi is going to increase, because Pepsi is now considered relatively cheaper than Coke. Hence, the consumer is going to switch resources from consuming Coke, which is now relatively more expensive, to consuming Pepsi, which is now relatively cheaper. The opposite scenario could hold if the price of Coke decreased. If the price of Coke goes down, what happens is, so long as the price of Pepsi remains the same, the consumer of Coke is now going to perceive Coke as being relatively cheaper compared to Pepsi. And what happens is that he is going to switch resources away from consuming the substitute good, which is Pepsi, into consuming Coke. Hence, the demand for Coke is going to increase, while the demand for Pepsi is going to decrease. Hence, as the price of a particular commodity increases, consumers usually switch their consumption from the commodity that are now relatively more expensive into commodity that are considered relatively cheaper. On the contrary, as the price of a commodity decreases, consumers now perceive those commodities as being relatively cheaper, and hence switches resources from consuming substitute commodity into consuming that commodity. In summary, the substitution effect refers to the portion of change in quantity demand that occurs as a result of the fact that consumers switches from consumption of one commodity to the consumption of another commodity. Let's look at the third example, which is the diminishing marginal utility. Diminishing marginal utility. In economics, we believe that consumers consume goods and services in order to gain satisfaction, which is sometimes called utility. And in doing that, consumers usually weigh or compare the benefit they are going to derive by consuming an extra unit of a commodity with the amount of money they are going to pay to consume that unit of a commodity. Hence, in economics, we usually say that consumers are rational, and rational consumers think at the margin. By thinking at the margin, it is believed that consumers weigh pros and cons before taking decisions. Hence, they consider marginal benefits and marginal costs. By diminishing marginal utility, it is believed that as more and more units of a particular commodity is consumed, that the additional satisfaction and the extra unit that the consumer consumes declines as he increases his consumption. What it means is that consumer can only keep on consuming those goods and services so long as the price of such commodity keep declining. Hence, if the price of a commodity remains the same, consumers will get to a point that they now consider extra consumption as being relatively more expensive or as being relatively costlier compared to the benefit they are going to gain from consuming such commodity. And as a result of that, the consumer is going to pause consumption. The only thing you can do in order to stimulate such consumers to increase his consumption of such commodity is by decreasing the price of that commodity. Hence, decrease in price of a commodity acts as an incentive, as a motivation for consumers to continue consuming that commodity, because the more and more of such commodity that consumer consumes, the lesser the additional satisfaction that extra unit of that commodity provides to that consumer. The concept of diminishing marginal utility is going to be further discussed in details when we get to the theory of consumer behavior, but that's not going to be now. We are going to look at that as time goes on in subsequent series. Thank you for watching our video. Please stay subscribed, and if you have not subscribed yet, don't forget to click the subscribe button. Please like, comment and share our videos to reach wider audience. Thank you.